Okay. All right, state your names.
Yeah. I'm Alex.
I'm
The
Dave.
Great.
I'm Megan.
I'm Will.
All right. So I'm doing my informative speech on schizophrenia. Have any of y'all ever been around somebody who's had schizophrenia before? Maybe you can like stand in line next to somebody in a grocery store who's had it before.
Yeah, make me freak out.
Yes.
I don't
Yeah?
think so.
What'd you think?
Shy away from them.
Scared you?
No. Nah.
Nah.
It scared me. It's like,
Thought they were kind of crazy?
oh yeah. Of course.
You been around anybody?
Uh-uh.
No.
No.
Well, I worked around a lot of people who had schizophrenia, and I always thought it was really sad and kind of intriguing because people who have schizophrenia suffer from really bizarre behaviors, and it was always intriguing me to see how people reacted towards them. And so I'm going to talk about the history, causes, statistics, and treatments of schizophrenia. I'm going to start off with the history. In ancient times, mental illness was not viewed as a sickness, it was viewed as demonic possession. And so in the ancient times, people thought that supernatural beings would come down and they caused these illnesses for past sins. And not too long ago, archaeologists found these skulls and they found huge holes in the side of them. And they attributed it to a procedure called trepanation. Trepanation is a surgical procedure in which they would tie you down and they would chip holes into the side of your head to release the demonic or evil spirits. And as you probably can tell, not too many people survived it, but in a few of these skulls, they actually found some bone tissue where it started to regrow. And so a few of these people actually survived it. And after that, Hippocrates came around in the Golden Age, and he proposed his theory of the balance of humors. The balance of humors, he thought that if you suffered from any kind of mental illness, such as schizophrenia, that you had an imbalance of humors, which could involve like an excess of urine, an excess of feces, an excess of blood, and an excess of phlegm. And so if you suffer from schizophrenia, it was thought that you had an excess of blood, which caused psychotic disorders. And so what they would do is, again, they would tie you up and they would cut you, and they would drain you of all the excess blood, which in most situations would cause death. And so then came Galen in the Middle Ages, and he suggested the idea of exorcism. And that includes all the ritualistic things that exorcism involves now, but it would also include beating their victims to death or starving them to death to prove to the evil spirits that the body was no longer habitual, that you couldn't live there anymore. Then came witchcraft in the 15th century. In witchcraft, they proposed that all kinds of different tests to see if you were actually performing any kind of witchcraft theories. And one of the most memorable ones that I know of is the water flow test. In the water flow test, they would tie your arms together by your wrist, and then they would tie that to your ankles, and they would throw you in the water, like in a lake or a pond. If you floated to the top, you were considered to be doing witchcraft or that you were possessing demon spirits. But if you sank to the bottom, such as the picture right here in the lower right-hand corner, they cleared you of all witchcraft things, and they said that you were fine, there was nothing wrong with you. And this is where the theory, or the saying, damned if you do and damned if you don't, comes from. In 1888, a man named Emily Kraepelin wrote down the first observation of schizophrenia. And he named it after the Greek roots, meaning schizo, which is split, and phrene, which means mind. Which doesn't necessarily mean that there's a split in the mind, it just was, he just named it that to kind of summarize the characteristics that schizophrenias go through. It's defined as a chronic disorder that involves problems with thinking, emotions, and perceptions. People who have schizophrenia usually suffer from like unrealistic perceptions. They think that you're out to get them, or that the CIA has bugged their house, or that the people in the TVs are actually talking to them. They also suffer from hallucinations and delusions. I mean, just about everything that you could ever possibly imagine can be a part of schizophrenia as far as mental illness is concerned. And that's the reason a lot of people back in the old days feared it. In the 19th century, John Baptiste came up with the Reform movement, and he said that people with mental illnesses should be treated humanely, and that if you put them in an asylum and you treated them with kindness, that they would eventually get well. And that proved to be the case. And so that's how actually people in the asylums actually got released and started wandering around the streets again. But the hospitals started to lose funding. And so after that, a lot of the medication up until the 20th century, psychology it wasn't working out that well for them. Symptoms, as far as statistics go, 1% of the entire U.S. population is affected, and 24 million people in the entire world have schizophrenia. 10% of those diagnosed with schizophrenia commit suicide within the first 20 years. Men under the age of 30 are more likely to commit suicide than women. It's really hard to intervene in these situations because people with schizophrenia, they have, like I said, they don't have any kind of premeditated thoughts or anything about it because their mind is so jumbled, and you don't usually intervene before it happens. It usually costs the U.S. $30 billion a year in funding for treatments for schizophrenics, which accounts for 75% of all treatments for mental illness. The medications involve antipsychotic drugs, which involve some kind of form of tranquilizers. The tranquilizers, after a long-term effect, will cause a disease which in turn causes you to have problems grimacing with your face. It lacks emotional, you can't be able to do any kind of emotional facial features on your face. You grimace a lot, you have a problem chewing incessantly, you move your arms around a lot, and there's no cure for any of it. There's no cure for that, or there's no cure for schizophrenia. Even after stopping the medications, a lot of people actually still suffer from the effects of it. Realistically speaking, it may be decades before we actually uncover causes or cures for schizophrenia, but right now it's attributed to environmental factors and social factors. They think that family abuse can cause it or onset it, and they also believe that stress, like a stressful event, like maybe if you've lost your parents in like a bad car accident, or something damaging as if your house maybe burns down. Because you're not born with schizophrenia, you're actually, later on in life, you actually develop symptoms of it, and it starts to progress from there. You get your first symptom by the age of 25. And so, there's actually, right here in the book, there's a really good excerpt of a guy. I've been diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia. I also suffer from clinical depression. Before I found the correct medications, I was sleeping on the floor, afraid to sleep in my own bed. I was hearing voices that lately had turned from being sometimes helpful to being terrorizing. The depression had been responsible for my being irritable and full of dread, especially in the mornings, becoming angry over frustrations at work, and seemingly internalizing other people's problems. The voices, human sounding and sounding from a short distance outside my apartment, were slowly turning nearly all bed. I could hear them jeering around me, plotting against me, singing songs sometimes that would make me sense later in the day when I would do something wrong at work or at home. I began sleeping on the floor of my living room because I was afraid of a presence in the bedroom that was torturing good forces around me. If I slept in the bedroom, the nightly torture would cause me to make mistakes during the day. A voice calling himself Fatty Acid stopped me from drinking soda, and another voice allowed me only one piece of bread with my meals. And so as y'all can tell, it's a really debilitating disease, and it not only affects the people that have schizophrenia, but it affects their family and their friends. They can't work in social settings, their jobs, they lose their friends, they lose their family, they lose everything dear and close to them, and a lot of people just don't know how to react to them. And it's really, really sad. So hopefully, now that y'all have a little bit of information about it, y'all know how to react later on when y'all meet somebody with it.
Yeah, because I didn't know that at all.
Okay.
Good
Well,
job.
thank y'all for coming. I appreciate it.
I thought the people that were talking to me on TV were real.
We'll try not to put all those